Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Wavelength.
You know, Adelaide has worked really hard over the last few years to build a small bar reputation. When I was a kid, the big night in Adelaide was kind of, staying at home and watching the bill.
Sparking the combos about Adelaide.
As a female Sparky, I did get lots of comments on my gender.
You should be having...
And here to make a difference. Yeah, make the difference. Give the youth a voice.
On Fresh 92.7.
Well, welcome to Wavelength, sparking the combos about Adelaide you should be having with Zane and David.
Hello, Zane. It's good to be back this week. It's a big show again.
Yes, also joined in the studio by Arj. Good afternoon.
Guys. Cheers. Thanks for having me on.
Arj, you are responsible for a big investigation that we're going to get stuck into later in the show, which I'm very, very excited and can't wait to get people's opinions on.
But first of all, today everyone's talking about how Labor leader Anthony Albanese has questioned whether Prime Minister Scott Morrison believes that journalism is a crime during a heated debate in Question Time today. The discussion follows the recent arrests of ABC and News Corp journalists by the Australian Federal Police earlier this year, and today's nationwide protest by leading newspapers regarding the Australian public's right to know. A man is in critical condition after attempting to abseil off the balcony of a CBD apartment. Following a domestic dispute with his wife, the man was locked out on the balcony, so he attempted to escape the building by using a rope. The rope snapped, sending the man falling 10 metres and resulting in him being taken to hospital with life-threatening injuries. And the much-beloved East Terrace Continental Cafe closed its doors for good yesterday after more than 20 years of trading. The business was opened in 1996 as a small deli before expanding into a busy cafe.
Yeah, every newspaper in the entire country basically blacked out all about your right to know, and this is exactly what we did a story about a couple of weeks ago.
We sure did.
Regarding press freedom and whether we as a society should be more worried about it. So hopefully this leads to more and more people actually thinking about these things and getting concerned about these things, because it does affect us all. Tonight, is it fair to be discriminated against for your tattoos? From the workplace to the club, we chat about what to do if you're not let in because of your skin. Yes, it rhymes, and I was very proud of coming up with that.
You're a genius sometimes, Zane. Your mind.
We meet the man doing 30 comedy gigs in 30 days to raise awareness of mental illness. And next, with the Uluru climbing ban imminent, we look into what makes a sacred site and whether there's more we should be protecting.
Wavelength.
Zane, you may be familiar with a very big rock at the centre of Australia.
Which one are you talking about?
I think it's called Uluru, and it's actually about to be closed to climbers forever, which is, I guess, a massive win for the Aboriginal communities in the area.
Huge, and also something that people are talking about so much.
I know.
Right
I
now.
cannot get through most conversations without a very polite debate about it.
At least it's polite.
Yeah.
At least you're not dealing with any Pauline Hansons.
Yeah, but what prompted us to finally take this step, and should we consider applying bans to other sacred sites around us? Here's Andrew with more.
Wavelength.
Uluru, one of, if not the most well-known landmarks in Australia. Thousands of tourists flock to see the red giant each year, many climbing it against the wishes of the local Anangu traditional owners. And after much deliberation, the climb's finally set to close later this week. So why is Uluru so sacred? Why is the climb being shut, and should we be more respectful of the wishes of traditional owners? To answer these questions, I spoke with Steve Baldwin, the manager of Park Operations and Visitor Services at the Uluru Katajuda National Park. He says the closure's been a long time coming.
It's something that Ananu and the board and the park have been working towards for 10 years. There was in our management plan and has been since 2010. So the decision is based on a number of conditions that needed to be met, specifically that the percentage of people climbing drops to 20% or below, that there are adequate other activities, and that the reasons for visiting the park were to see the natural and cultural attractions rather than climbing. And the board 2 years ago believed that all of those conditions have been met, and so in November of 2017 the decision was made to close from 26 October this year.
So why is Uluru and the surrounding lands so important to the Anangu people?
A lot of people don't realise, or I suppose consider, that Arjuna or the Pitjantjatjara language is a verbal language. It's not written, and so a lot of the landmarks, including Uluru, play a part in what they call chokapa, which is their creation stories. And so there's features on Uluru that are very, very important in the stories that they tell and are passed on from generation to generation. So they use these features on the rock to actually tell those stories. And so some are male, some are female, and so the rock itself. And the way I put it to particularly European and American visitors is it's like a church. It's a religious site. And so when you explain to people that they're in a sensitive area and that it's culturally inappropriate, their eyes glaze. when you say, look, what you've done is the equivalent of climbing or abseiling off the Basilica or Notre Dame, they get it then and they go, oh, they're horrified. So it is extremely important to Anangu, who are the traditional owners, and they just would prefer not to see people clambering over these landmarks.
We've seen photos of thousands of people rushing to do the climb before it closes. Why do you think so many people are doing this, considering the wishes of the traditional owners?
The board was quite mindful of that when they made the decision, and they appreciated there were many people who wanted to climb, and that is why the 2 years' notice was given. But I think personally it's the Australian want to conquer something or to climb on top of things, and also the fact they realise this will be their last opportunity. But what we've seen is that many of the people coming out here were brought out by their parents when they were young and climbed, and so they want their children to experience the same. So we are seeing a fairly significant influx of families climbing because they want their kids to do it before they don't have the opportunity.
According to Steve, those who are caught climbing the rock after the closure could be fined or even taken to court. He also says October the 26th, when the climb closes, is a pretty significant date.
That actually is the 34th anniversary of the day that the land was handed back to the Anangu traditional owners. So back in 1985, that was when it was handed back to traditional owners. So what's coming up is probably one of the most significant things to happen on the park since that handback.
Speaking a bit more generally, should people be paying a bit more attention to the wishes of traditional owners throughout Australia?
I suppose from a tourism point of view, it's not that people should. It's not my position to say what people should or shouldn't do, but I think you're finding worldwide, and not just Australia, that tourists are seeking more of a cultural experience, an experience where things have been done in an appropriate way rather than in a culturally insensitive way. So gone are the days of people wanting to do something which is damaging to the area. People are mindful and a lot more sensitive to the environment and to culture. So I think people are seeking out destinations and locations which are listening to the traditional owners and to the local inhabitants rather than just running roughshod over them.
Aside from the closure itself, Steve reckons there's another positive to come out of the situation.
The fact that the traditional owners have been able to make such a significant decision shows that joint management, which is how we're managed, is actually working. They can make such a landmark decision outside of government, and that to me is one of the most important things to come out of this.
Wavelength.
Andrew, with a discussion and an interview with the Parks Authority about the Uluru climbing ban, which comes into effect at the end of this week.
Okay, so I suppose if you desperately want to, you still got a little bit of time. Wouldn't recommend. It seems a bit odd. I found what the oddest thing about it is, like, they've announced that it's going to be banned, and people are still like, oh yeah, I'm going to go do it.
Yeah. Also, I don't know. As someone who's chronically afraid of heights, I can't relate to this. I have no desire to climb the rock. Oh. I've never had a desire to climb the rock, and I will never have a desire to climb the rock, even outside of the sacred connotations that it has amongst the traditional owners.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. We don't have to be able to climb everything and stand on everything, you know? Surely we can just leave some things lie. There are better views that you can get from climbing on mountains anyway.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it's so beautiful from afar. I don't even know what you would get from climbing on it apart from seeing it up close and just being able to say that you climbed it, which is just an odd, like, it's odd anyway. So, yeah, I mean, I'm just happy that, like, these types of things these decisions are being made, and hopefully people will respect it once the ban comes into effect.
Well, yes, exactly.
Well, I think it's a little bit odd. It's kind of like going to Egypt and wanting to climb the pyramids if the Egyptian government and the people say, yeah, we'd rather you didn't do that.
Yeah.
And if they announce, okay, from this date forward, we're no longer allow people to climb the pyramids of Giza, and then thousands of people rock up to do it the week before.
Yeah, but it's not even like this is just an arbitrary ban that's been enforced. There's a real meaning behind the decision.
Absolutely.
Which I don't understand how you can't respect.
Yeah. I mean, we've come a long way. It's only been quite recently that I think it was stopped being taught as Ayers Rock and started being taught in schools as Uluru. I think even when I was growing up in primary school, I was still taught that it was called Ayers Rock. So
well, it wasn't until I was partway through primary school that it was changed to Uluru, and there was quite a big push to say you could no longer call it Ayers Rock.
What the hell is going on in politics at the moment? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
Federal Attorney General Christian Porter has told the ACT their new cannabis ownership law doesn't necessarily provide the legal protections they think it does. Mr. Porter says ultimately it's still against Commonwealth laws to possess cannabis in the ACT, and that he hopes the police will continue to act on them. Meanwhile, Labor has sided with the government, passing legislation which will see money redirected from education infrastructure to disaster relief. However, some opposition MPs are concerned that the move could see investment in research dealt a massive blow. In return for Labor's support, the government will give an extra $50 million per year to TAFE. Back home now, an SA's anti-corruption commissioner has suggested SA Health is riddled with maladministration and potentially even corruption. Commissioner Bruce Lander says it's hard to tell the extent of the issue due to poor processes and record keeping, and that he can't pursue it due to insufficient resources. And finally overseas, with the October 31st Brexit deadline looming, things are just going from bad to worse for the UK. Prime Minister Boris Johnson has been forced to ask for an extension, however also sent a letter to the EU arguing against it. This will definitely be one to keep an eye on. And that's what the hell's going on in politics this week.
Thank you, Andrew, letting us know what the hell is going on in politics every single week here on Wavelength. The other big thing that happened today, not strictly political, but still political, I guess, is every newspaper in the country blacked out.
Yeah.
And it's all about your right to know, and it's all about protesting the way that the government is currently handling information and going after journalists and... a lot of stuff that we talked about actually a couple of weeks ago in a story that you helped out quite a lot on, David.
Yeah. Well, I mean, a couple of months ago there were those arrests by the Australian Federal Police in the ABC office, and then a News Corp journalist was also arrested for publishing, I guess, what the government didn't want to be exposed, I suppose.
Or there were raids, not arrests, so to speak.
Raids, yeah.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure that doesn't matter. So they... And now the broader newspapers, they all this morning published their front pages of the newspaper with everything blacked out, saying this is top secret. So obviously they're getting a bit angry. And so, like I mentioned before at the beginning of the show, even Anthony Albanese ripped into Scott Morrison today asking if he thought that journalism was a crime.
Yes.
So... there's certainly a lot going on there.
It would be nicer if him and the Labor Party actually just opposed the laws that are getting us into this position anyway, but, I wouldn't want to tell him how to do his job.
Well, the scariest part about some of these raids as well, that it was across all media organisations. So it wasn't just the ABC or the SBS or Fairfax. It was the Murdoch Empire. It was News Corp. It was across the board. Well, I can't in that 2 weeks where they had, I think, 3 raids or something like that. It was pretty much one from each group, and it's generally more what's embarrassing rather than what's a national security interest. I remember reading a couple of months ago how what's the company that's building our submarines? Naval.
Oh, don't ask me that.
I think it's Naval Group, the French company. So one of our ministers asked for. The schematics under the Freedom of Information Act, and the Defence Force accidentally sent him a semi-unredacted form which had too much information before sending him the redacted form again in 2 separate emails, and he realised half the stuff that they've redacted is simply to cover up embarrassment rather than actual dangers of leaking, information about our subs.
Well, if it is to do with embarrassing things, but I don't think it always is. I think a lot of it is things that journalists believe are in the public's interest to know, but whichever way it is, it's obviously quite chilling that the Federal Police will arrest journalists for doing their job.
Yeah, isn't it interesting, though, that we're now at the point today where the media is really taking this united stand, and I think it took the victimization of News Corp and of the advertiser to really make that happen, because there's this perception, particularly if you are not a fan of the News Corp newspapers, that they're really in bed with the Liberal government and Rupert Murdoch, etc., etc. So for the government to, turn on them, for the AFP to raid a News Corp journalist as well, I think that really maybe crossed the line, and now we're seeing...
potentially.
Drama.
It's very dramatic, isn't it? Well, we haven't been rated here at Fresh 92.7, and hopefully it stays that way.
I don't think that will happen.
Wavelength.
Here is an interesting question for you, Zane. Is it fair to be discriminated against because of your tattoos? Some workplaces will drop you or refuse to give you work in the first place, and venues might not let you in based on the marks on your skin. Arj spoke to one man who challenged the local venue's decision not to open their doors to him.
Wavelength.
I sat down with Keegan Sweeney, a tattoo artist, and his ongoing battle with one Adelaide venue.
Gone to all the venues, restaurants, everything down here since I was 18. I'm 33 now. Never had an issue with any tattoos. Always been heavily covered. Gone in maybe about 8 odd months ago, and they just said you can't get in because of tattoos and stuff. So I asked to speak to management. No one would. And then I got email addresses from them, and no one would get back to me. I tried again another couple of months later, just in the area, and then when I spoke to them about it, they said, yeah, it was because there was a fight between two patrons that one of them happened to be tattooed. So then the management just said from now on, then don't let people in with tattoos. As soon as that had happened, though, looking at their social medias and that, they actually held tattoo flash days within their venue. So there was like an actual tattooer in there working. Half their staff are heavily tattooed. The head chef, I think, actually is full sleeved. It's just really inconsistent. At that same time period too, a friend of mine, he's a barber, he's heavily tattooed. He got asked to leave mid-meal. He was actually eating dinner, and then they asked him to leave. So after that happening, I then put it on my Instagram. I posted that in the morning. I then was tattooing. I had a break a few hours later, and I had about 3 or 4 missed calls, and it was from their sort of legal PR team. They were trying to negotiate with me because obviously they were getting a lot of flack on social media after that, and they offered me a $200 voucher, which I couldn't use in there anyway because I can't get in. So I refused that. I said I'd rather just see it changed, because when I looked at their actual policy, it says tattoos are welcome as long as you're of neat appearance.
So they don't have any specific policy against neck tattoos or face tattoos like other venues?
No, that's right, exactly. And I think that's what it is. It's just being clear about it, because then, no one can be made to feel like singled out or anything. Like, it's either you've got a policy or you don't. So if you can't have visible tattoos and there's a patron, then tell your chef to have a sleeve on, because otherwise it's a bit unfair, really. And don't let some people in and some not. You'll see some venues do that where, say, they want more females in, where, it might be a female with a back tattoo showing, and they'll do that. But then a male with a hand tattoo, they might not. So most places that do have a strict policy, which is pretty rare these days anyway, but the ones that do, generally it's like, that's it, no visible tattoos. That's fair enough. If they want to do it, I still don't like that. I don't think it's right, but at the end of the day, I'm not going to argue with them. It's their venue. But
so you'd rather just there be some consistency with their tattoo policy. So if they have a tattoo policy that says no neck tattoos, then no one with a neck tattoo, male, female.
Definitely, yeah. For them to say that, because the last time I tried to go up, because of the stuff on social media, they then, I guess, knew who I was straight away. Because as I walked up, he just went, no, mate. So I thought, I'll try again and see now. On the phone, she said, look, it's fine, everything's all good. I've spoken to them, should be fine. Here's a voucher. I said anyway, I don't want a voucher. I just want you to change that policy, or make sure that it's clear. I wanted something said, say on social media or something, to be especially with all the attention they were getting on there, just to put something up and say, look, it is okay as long as the appearance is our policy, because then it's transparent, it's clear, and then they're accountable for it.
All right, well, thank you very much for joining me, Keegan.
Wavelength.
That was Arj chatting to a man who was barred from a venue based on his tattoos for Wavelength on Fresh 92.7, sparking the converse about Adelaide you should be having. The question we're asking tonight is it fair to be discriminated against because of your tattoos? We're going to address workplace stuff a little bit later in the show. That particular situation was about not being let into a venue, which is a very common story. Some of my brother's friends have had this happen to them as well. They've even been on door lists. They've organised ahead of time, and then they've been turned away at the door because
rough.
They've got too many tattoos.
I got turned away from a venue once because I was wearing a Slipknot t-shirt with a flame shirt over the top. Does that count?
I got turned away from a venue once because I was wearing one of the Kanye West Yeezus merch t-shirts, with the vaguely kind of heavy metal inspired design on it.
Yeah.
And they told me that I couldn't get in because I wasn't wearing a collar, and I was like, okay, but you're playing Kanye West right now. This is a hip-hop club, and I don't understand.
Classic. I don't have any tattoos, though, so I can't really weigh in.
I have one on my ankle. If I got discriminated against based on that, I'd be very surprised. Arjuna in the studio with us. Hello.
Yes.
With this story, you told me that you got a pretty decent response when you asked for examples of this happening to people, right?
Yeah, so I hit up my social media, and I basically just put a call out for people who have been discriminated in their work or been turned away from venues. In this particular instance, I found it really interesting what happened to Keegan, because the venue itself doesn't have a policy against tattoos. I know there are several around Hindley Street where they just say, no tattoos, and people can either accept that or not. But this particular venue recently changed their door policy without updating any of their socials or their online, and they've had tattoo flash days and things like that inside the venue, and yet they're turning away people at the door who've got tattoos.
Yeah.
So strange.
And it raises questions about fairness. I mean, there's countless examples as well, I think, of venues who just kind of apply their policies very arbitrarily anyway.
Yeah, but it's like 2019. Like everyone, like so many people our age have tattoos. Like,
yeah,
I hardly know anyone who doesn't have one, and they're all extremely. What's the mental gymnastics you go through to be like, oh, you have a tattoo, I can't let you in? Like,
yeah,
who cares? It's just a tattoo.
I think there's still connotations that if you're heavily tattooed, you might be possibly tied up in gangs. I think maybe that's the logic.
I can understand that, like, as a traditional train of thought, but nowadays there's been a huge movement towards it's more about body art, and I think it's very obvious when you look at people's tattoos whether it's artwork or whether they're gang related.
Wavelength.
Madonna hung up on Fresh 92.7. You with Zane, David and Arj for Wavelength, sparking the convos about Adelaide you should be having. That song goes out to the person who texted us at the start of the show saying, play 4 minutes by Madonna. Don't make me get my aux cord. We do not have that song. But we do have Hung Up, and
which is as equally as good in my opinion.
Way better.
Oof. I guess so.
This is not a show to be discussing Madonna opinions. What we are discussing is it fair to be discriminated against because of your tattoos? Just before the break, we heard from Arj, who you interviewed a man who was barred from a venue because of his tattoos. He really tried hard to fight that and really struggled to get answers. We got a text from someone who said, I got turned away once from a venue because my pants had too many pockets.
Totally fair enough.
I love.
I understand why you got turned away.
I'm imagining real, like, baggy Matrix pants with heaps of zips.
No, I'm picturing green camo.
Yeah, I'm thinking Kathmandu style.
Yeah, just pockets down the leg.
Pants.
Just like multiple pockets for like storing carabiners, that kind of vibe.
Dave's just gone out and he's gone, the pockets are convenient, mate.
Yeah.
They're handy. I can keep like a week's supply of food without having to
keep trail mix in here in case I need a snack.
I don't think people are bringing trail mix to the club, Zane.
Maybe they should.
Yeah, they're clearly bringing Scroggin.
Yeah, that's more likely.
Let's return to some modicum of seriousness here. So later on, we are going to be talking about whether it's fair to lose your job or be, I guess, victimized by your workplace because of your tattoos. That's the question we threw out on Facebook. 14% said, yes, that's fair. And 86% said no.
Not surprised. I don't know. I feel like most people around, most young people would say at this point that tattoos are pretty fine.
Well, yeah, exactly. We got a couple of comments, though. Paul said, of course it is fair to be discriminated against. You're representing the company you work for, and it's up to them the image they want to portray. There are consequences for every choice in life, and too many people seem to think they can do whatever they want these days without repercussions.
Well, look, I'm not expecting the Supreme Court of the Supreme Court Justice of South Australia to rock up with face tats. You know? I think
that would be pretty, like, cool if that happened.
I know.
I think that would be awesome if I rocked up to the magistrates one day and the judge had mass ink and, like, a huge mohawk. I think that would just make my day.
Post Malone for President 2020.
Stop. Arj, you were telling us off air about a conversation you had with Johnny just before the show about, you know, his thoughts on this and you know, having tattoos in the workplace and representing your workplace. Johnny raised a really interesting question.
Yeah, so we were talking about face tattoos in particular. So they're somewhat harder to cover. And you would sort of understand, say, a lawyer rocks up with a heavy amount of facial tattoos. And what's the difference when saying, okay, that's fine because that represents you, but then why can't you show up to work in T-shirts, shorts, and thongs? Because it's not proper business attire. And the way I feel about it is, well, if your workplace asked you to wear makeup to cover your facial tattoos or wear sleeves or something like that so that they weren't visible, so that you looked professional, and they still hired you regardless of your tattoos, I think that would be fair.
Yeah, it's interesting with how far a workplace should be able to go in controlling your image and projecting their image.
Especially because tattoos are so personal and I think reflect what someone feels is important in their life.
Well,
things that they love and want to show the world as well.
But then you think about, like, airlines where there's such intense standards of what you have to look like, particularly for women. Like the makeup has to be a certain way.
Wait, do you mean for like
flight attendants and stuff, like cabin crew? Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've chosen a job where I get to wear t-shirts and jeans and trainers like every single day. Like I'm full Sneens dad at the moment.
You could have a face tat.
I probably could get away with that. I don't want to.
I don't think,
but it's nice to know that the option's there.
I don't think you should, Zane, but you could.
There's no way that's happening.
I do remember during my induction when I was talking to you and Burjo back in the day, one of my questions was, is there a dress code around Fresh? Because I am a very casual dresser 90% of the time because I'm just that lazy. I'm in an Element t-shirt at the moment and some dodgy jeans.
Hate the way you said that anyway.
But like I'd be more than willing to put on a proper shirt and chinos and what have you. But it is interesting in terms of how much say your work should have on how you dress.
Well, yeah. I also think maybe there should be some individual, almost risk placed upon yourself. Like if you're going to go out there with tattoos, that's your choice. And if people are maybe not going to buy from you, if you're in like, say, a sales or one of those kind of persuasive job roles, then that's on you, and you can deal with that, you know. Whether you want to do a full suit and business attire, like, you can present yourself, and yeah, there might be blowbacks from people maybe treating you differently, but I think that out-and-out discrimination is not great.
Well, we also had Simon commenting on the Facebook poll saying it's not fair to discriminate against someone who has tattoos. I've got tats, but I have them in places where I can cover them if I choose to or need to. Really, it depends on what industry you work in, but public image is a huge part of many industries, so they have the right to address that concern also.
Exactly. Let's get stuck into what the hell is going on in sport at the moment with Luca, but we would love for you to join us in this convo, 1300 73 73 74. Do you think it's fair to be discriminated against because of your tattoos? Here's Luca.
What the hell is going on in sports at the moment? Wavelength on Fresh 92.7.
The finalists for the 2019 Sport SA South Australian Sport Awards were announced last Friday, with 36 finalists making the prestigious cut across 11 categories. Some notable sporting achievements in our state aiming at gaining recognition for their success include the 2018 and 19 World Lifesaving Championships, the African Nations Cup, the National Indigenous Cricket Championships, and the introduction of the Blind Cricket SA Association. Sport SA will also be announcing their new partnership with Heart 180, a service providing life-saving defibrillators as well as training and support to ultimately save more lives in South Australia. The South Australian Sport Awards are celebrating their 10th anniversary this year and will be held on November 22nd at Adelaide Oval. Over to basketball now, and the 36ers have recorded a 6-point housewarming win over the informed Brisbane Bullets at their new stadium on Saturday night. After the game, coach Joey Wright said he's pleased that the team was able to reward their fans at the new home after a huge off-season hype surrounding the big-time move to the Adelaide Entertainment Centre. On the women's side, and the Lightning have recorded a huge 18-point away win over the Townsville Fire, which sees them move up into the top 4. After announcing his impending retirement and undergoing major hip resurfacing surgery, it was thought that former two-time Wimbledon champ Andy Murray would never play tennis again. However, just 9 months later, he has beaten old rival Stan Wawrinka to claim the European Open and breathe life back into his career. To soccer now, and a depleted Adelaide United may be without 6 key players for their FFA Cup final clash on Wednesday night at Cooper Stadium. After losing 2-1 to their cup final opponents Melbourne City on Sunday, another injury to debutant Yared Abichu added salt to the wound, with Elsie, Boland, Blackwood and O'Halloran rounding out the list of injured players ineligible for Wednesday's do-or-die clash. And lastly, Chasey is usually a game reserved for children and rowdy dogs, but what happens when you mix in some cool obstacles and parkouring English lads? You get World Chase Tag. Essentially, the remake of the old schoolyard classic consists of 2 teams, with every player given 20 seconds to evade their opposing chaser. The 6th edition of the World Championships kicks off in December in London. And that is what the hell is going on in sports at the moment.
Thank you, Luca. I love how he always ends those segments with a very weird sport.
Where does he find these sports? I need to know, Luca. How do you know these things?
Wavelength.
Tonight we're asking whether it's fair to be discriminated against because of your tattoos. In part 2 of his investigation, Arj spoke to a couple of tattoo enthusiasts who've experienced that discrimination firsthand.
Wavelength.
All right, so I'm joined here by Dr. Sarah and Matthew, aka Bummer, and we're here to talk about tattoo discrimination. So you both are very heavily inked up here. You've got quite an extensive range of tattoos, and you both own a studio, the Grim Raptor.
Yes.
And how long have you guys been running that studio for?
We opened in mid-January, so nearly coming up to our first birthday now.
And now, Dr. Sarah, you work down at the Royal Adelaide Hospital.
I do, yeah.
How has your tattoos affected, like, your job?
Yeah, well, I guess people ask me that quite often, thinking that it would be, a negative thing to be so colourful and be in a really conservative industry. But to be honest, I haven't had any negative experiences so far, and I've just recently been employed next year as a surgical resident, and I got my first preference in my first hospital, and I went through the full interview process just like everybody else did, and clearly that didn't, look non-favourably upon me. So I've been really lucky. Patients really like it. They think it's kind of a way of, I guess, like breaking down maybe some of those traditional barriers that might exist between, a medical professional and a patient. And it's just, I'm like any other person. I'm just colourful.
That's really awesome to hear. So employers didn't make any sort of judgments or say that you had to cover certain tattoos during your residency or anything like that?
No. So obviously, initially when I was in medical school, I was a bit more cautious about being quite so open about my visible tattoos and used to wear, slightly longer sleeves and so forth. But in the hospital system, especially with SA Health, we have, the bare below the elbows policy, which is for infection control reasons. So even if I wanted to cover my tattoos, then I'd be putting myself at risk of carrying infection around. So I just wear things above my elbow, and it's not been an issue at all. And no one's really said that, hey, you're not going to get anywhere because you're colourful. I mean, I work really hard to be a good doctor, and I'm still very junior and have a lot to learn, but the patients seem to like me, and so do my colleagues. So yeah, I haven't had any real obstacles yet.
So how about in public life, outside of professional, what sort of backlash, if any, have you guys faced?
These days, it's getting a lot better. Every now and then it just becomes a thing, like certain restaurants, or if you're interstate, a casino or something might kick up a little bit of a fuss of you being there. One example was just we went to just have lunch at I think it was just a pub in Brisbane, and we'd ordered our meal and had our table and drinks set, and the manager came out and asked us to leave an empty pub because we looked too offensive.
Yeah, that's probably the worst experience.
It's probably, the worst one I can really think of.
Yep.
So were you guys mid-meal or mid-drinks?
We just ordered our meals, probably mid-drink, I'd say, on our anniversary.
Yeah, we just went up to the Gold Coast.
It's a little disappointing.
Yeah, we just went up to the Gold Coast for like a weekend away, and it was like the middle of the day on a Wednesday or something, I think it was, and we weren't, this was our first, like lunchtime drink and food, and we weren't, doing anything inappropriate. We were just sitting down to have lunch, and they came up and said, leave. In Adelaide, like we've been pretty good here, like now, like even we went out to the casino on the weekend and we were fine, they let us in, there was no issues at all, so.
One thing I wanted to ask is, do you find you get any odd looks in the streets, maybe from kids or in particular? Yeah?
Absolutely still. It's always a bit of a treat when we go to a shopping centre or, where I don't notice it as much, but I suppose like I would notice people looking at her and vice versa. I suppose it's more when you're with a group of friends that maybe aren't as heavily tattooed. They're the ones that are like, dude, everybody's staring at you. And
yeah,
are they like, really?
Yeah, we don't really notice it so much. But I think kids are probably the ones that, like kids say exactly what they feel. So, they'll turn around and point.
Zero filter.
Yeah, zero filter. And, they're never really, they're just like, oh, wow, look at that. Like, especially, I guess, because we've both got really colourful hair as well and piercings. And especially for Matt, he's got facial tattoos, so he's a lot more noticeable than me. But, we get quite a good, get a good chuckle out of it, and lots of people honestly, want to just talk about the body art.
90% of the time, it's a really nice response.
It's fine. So, and we're always happy to talk about tattooing because we love it. We're in the industry and we really embrace it. So,
I have found myself, especially when I notice someone who's got a lot of tattoos, I will tend to look at them mostly just because I want to check out what they've got. I want to see their art, and sometimes it's not fully visible as they're walking or as I'm walking.
Absolutely.
I'm just like,
I think that's the other thing you need to embrace, being heavily tattooed as well, is, if you wear your canvas, people are going to want to look at it, so you can't be a shut-in and say, stop staring at me.
Yeah, and I guess the only thing that I will add to that can be somewhat negative, especially as a tattooed female that's quite heavily tattooed, and myself and a lot of my other friends that are as heavily tattooed as me do experience sometimes, is people will come up and often grab you like to look at your arms and look at your body art, and that's just not okay. So if you do want to talk to someone about your body art, by all means, we'll happily talk about it. Like, I love talking about it, but just don't ever grab anyone. Like, would you grab someone that isn't tattooed by the arm and talk to them about their skin? Like, is that appropriate? No. So that's probably the only thing I'd say. Like, just check yourself. Don't do that. It's not okay. Like, it's overstepping the boundary there. So.
I think that's a really good point to make to the fresh listeners. I mean, it goes across all walks. Do not touch anybody or anything that is not yours unless you have permission. I mean, I understand that you may get really excited and you want to check out their ink really in depth. Ask first,
correct.
Then touch.
Consent first, absolutely.
Yes. Yep. Not the conversation I was planning on having, but it is a conversation that we should always have.
Yeah.
Wavelength.
Arj there, chatting about, with a couple who were talking about their experiences with tattoo discrimination. That last story is crazy.
Yeah, getting kicked out of a pub whilst you're having your drinks.
Yes, let's talk about that first. That is insane. Like, mid-drink.
That just, to me, seems real poor business decision. I'll be honest. I don't own a venue myself. I don't own my own business, but I feel like kicking out patrons who are in the middle of their meal is a bit late.
It's crazy.
They're in there already.
Also, when she talked about being like grabbed all the time and people touching her to like look at her tattoos. Ugh.
Yeah, I think that's just a thing that I just feel it's just a prevailing issue that we have with women in society, where people think it's just totally fine to go up to them and grab them for
it's like
whatever
going
reasons.
up to a pregnant woman and touching her belly without permission. Which is something you shouldn't do.
No.
Don't do that.
Like I said in the segment, always ask first before you touch someone, because they're not you.
It's a great rule to live life by. And something you really wish you only had to explain to 5-year-olds.
They sounded like really nice people, though.
They're amazing.
By the way.
They are amazing, wholesome people to have a conversation with.
Yes, we do have to chuck to a song. Arj, you said that they were doing a charity event, though. Do you want to quickly mention that?
Yes. So during November, they are actually they're doing tattoos for people who have gone through breast cancer and had I always butcher the pronunciation, mastectomies, where if they lose the original nipple. So they'll do realistic tattoos over that for free, which is just something I think is really awesome for them to be doing.
Oh, that's cool.
That's really nice.
That's cool. We'll chuck up some links when we chuck up the podcast as well.
Wavelength.
For our final story, Anthony spoke to a man doing 30 gigs in 30 days for a very awesome cause.
Wavelength.
The rates of depression have risen dramatically in the past 8 years and is now said to affect the lives of 1 million Australians. Stand-up comedian Mark Ryan, having dealt with its impacts, is undergoing an initiative of doing 30 gigs in 30 days, where $5 from every ticket sold goes to assisting the Black Dog Institute in preventing and treating mental illness. Having completed the first gig on the 1st of October, Mark tells us a little bit about the journey so far.
My jokes and my stories are based on my life. Whenever I do stand-up, it's kind of storytelling, and it's just really cool that I just tell my story, and then all of a sudden, people feel free to come up and have a yarn about what they've been through, because you've kind of taken the stigma away from it. In Roxby, some tried to come up to me and was like, "Oh man, 3 weeks ago I was going to take my own life. I had all my letters written out, and I was going to send them to everyone, and then I was just going to go do what I need to do." And he said, "But I didn't do it then. But now I've heard your story, I feel like I can carry on a bit more." It's all covered in jokes, so it's still stand-up comedy, but it all just touches on some life issues as well. And that's what I kind of say at the start, I can't fix anything, but I can relate to you, and we can talk about stuff at base level for all of us. That's the whole thing behind it, trying to let people know that there's a baseline of life, that we all feel different things, or disappointment, or, it's just a way of working that out.
The shows are being performed at some pretty quirky venues around Adelaide, and even took place at a barbershop last night. With only a limited amount of shows remaining, you can jump on Event Finder to get your tickets and join Mark in this fight against depression.
Wavelength.
Anthony there, talking to the man doing 30 gigs in 30 days, all to raise awareness and funds for a very, very good cause. Mm-hmm. We'll be chucking up a link as well on our website tomorrow, alongside the podcast, in case you need it to get along to any of those remaining gigs. That's an impressive slog.
Yeah, 30 gigs in 30 days.
Month is nearly over. I'm sure he'll be looking forward
Oh my
to
gosh,
a week
yes.
off. Thank you very much for listening tonight. Thank you, Arj, as well, for coming in and joining us.
Yeah, no worries. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely. We'll be back next week. We are going to throw over to the Come Up with Gunda G, Fresh Air and Studio 92 after that. And again, make sure you are subscribed to the Wavelength podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts, so you can be the first to know when every podcast goes online.
Wavelength.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.